The scent of money in Aurelia wasn't the crisp green of new bills. It was the aged, complex aroma of legacy. It smelled of vintage Bordeaux decanting, of white Alba truffles being shaved over handmade pasta, of the faint, expensive perfume that clung to the air long after its wearer had departed. For Amelia Vance, a 22-year-old balancing 3 searingly hot plates on one arm, it just smelled like the rent she couldn't afford and the experimental heart medication her mother desperately needed. To be a waitress at Aurelia, a 3 Michelin-star temple of gastronomy in Manhattan's Upper East Side, was to be a ghost in a tuxedo. Your job was to anticipate, to deliver, and to disappear. You were paid to be an invisible cog in a flawless machine, even when a patron's gaze slid over you as if you were a speck of dust on their $10,000 Hermes bag. Amelia was a master of this invisibility. She had to be. Her mother, Eleanor, a former librarian with a poet's soul and a failing heart, was facing a mountain of medical debt that grew with every beat of her weakening pulse. This job, with its rare but life-altering tips from the city's financial gods, was the only thing keeping them afloat. Her most frequent and least favorite occupants of Table 12, the prime corner booth with its panoramic view of Central Park, were Alistair Finch and his fiancée, Cassandra Davenport. Alistair Finch was a titan of the new world. His company, Finch Automata, was on the verge of launching a self-driving car technology that promised to redefine transportation. He was a self-made billionaire, a prodigy who saw the world in lines of code and predictive algorithms. He had intense, storm-grey eyes that seemed to be processing 1 million data points at once, which meant they rarely focused on the person in front of him. He wasn't cruel, just perpetually elsewhere, his mind navigating the complex architecture of his digital empire. His Patek Philippe watch was less a statement of wealth and more a functional reminder of the time he was losing. Cassandra Davenport, however, was a creature of the old world. Her family name was etched onto museum wings and university libraries, a legacy built on fortunes made 2 generations ago. She was sculpted from ice, with hair the color of pale champagne and a voice that could deliver the most cutting remark with the sweet cadence of a lullaby. To Alistair, she was the perfect partner, poised, connected, a human testament to the class and stability his new money craved. To the staff, she was a quiet nightmare. "This Pellegrino," Cassandra said one evening, nudging the bottle with a single, perfectly manicured finger. "It's been open for more than 10 minutes. I can taste the flatness. Are you incapable of providing fresh water?" "My deepest apologies, Miss Davenport. I'll bring a new bottle immediately," Amelia said, her professional smile feeling like a mask carved from stone. "See that you do," Cassandra murmured, already turning her dazzling smile back to Alistair. "Darling, I was just telling Muffy Biltmore that the theme for the Foundation Gala will be celestial dreams. It will be simply divine." Amelia retreated to the service station, her hands trembling not with fear, but with a tightly coiled rage. It wasn't the complaint. It was the casual dismissal, the effortless way Cassandra made her feel less than human. Alistair, as usual, just nodded, his gaze fixed on a stock analysis on his phone. "Sounds great, Cass. Whatever you think is best." Amelia often found herself studying him during those long, tense dinners. What did a man who built the future see in a woman so obsessed with preserving the past? They were the darlings of the society pages, a merger of innovation and heritage. But from Amelia's vantage point, just a few feet away, the union looked less like a partnership and more like a hostile takeover of his heart. She returned with a freshly opened bottle of Pellegrino, performing the ritual of pouring with the precision of a surgeon. Cassandra took a delicate sip. "Tolerable, she conceded, as if bestowing a great mercy. Amelia nodded and melted back into the shadows, a ghost once more. She chanced a final glance at the couple. Alistair had finally put his phone down. He was looking at Cassandra, a genuine, if weary, fondness in his eyes. He was in love, or at least in love with the idea of her, the perfect, unimpeachable First Lady for the Finch Empire. Amelia sighed, collecting a tray of empty wine glasses. It wasn't her world, it wasn't her problem. Her job was to serve the illusion, not to shatter it. The illusion shattered on a dreary, rain-slicked Thursday. It was the lunch service, typically a more subdued affair than the evening's grand performance. Amelia had been called in on her day off to cover for a sick colleague, a welcome chance for extra hours that she couldn't afford to refuse. The dining room was sparsely populated with quiet business lunches and the occasional tourist who'd mistaken Aurelia for a casual bistro. At 1:15 p.m., the hostess seated a party of 2 at table 8, a discreet alcove partially hidden by a large ornate screen. It was Amelia's section. She smoothed her apron, fixed her smile in place, and approached the table. "Welcome to Aurelia. May I start you with—" Her voice died in her throat. It was Cassandra Davenport, but the man seated across from her, his back to the room, was not Alistair Finch. This man had dark, slicked-back hair and wore a suit so sharp it could have drawn blood. As he turned slightly to place his napkin in his lap, Amelia's stomach plummeted. She recognized him instantly from the cover of Forbes. It was Julian Croft, CIO of a rival tech firm, a man known for his aggressive, ruthless business tactics. Alistair had publicly called him a vulture in a bespoke suit. "A bottle of the Krug Clos d'Ambonnet," Cassandra said, her voice low and intimate, not even bothering to look up at Amelia. "And 2 glasses. Don't dawdle." "Of course," Amelia murmured, her mind a frantic scramble of confusion. A business lunch with her fiancé's biggest competitor? The way they sat was all wrong. Their chairs were angled towards each other, their knees almost touching. Cassandra, usually so composed and regal, was leaning forward, her expression animated and conspiratorial. Amelia retrieved the champagne, her hands feeling numb and clumsy. She performed the service with robotic precision, her eyes fixed on the foaming liquid, deliberately avoiding the couple's faces. "That will be all, Anna," Cassandra said, dismissing her with a flick of her wrist, mangling her name as she always did. "It's Amelia," she said softly, the words escaping before she could stop them. Cassandra's cold blue eyes finally lifted, locking onto hers. "Pardon me?" "My name is Amelia, Miss Davenport." A smile, thin and sharp as a shard of glass, touched Cassandra's lips. "I don't pay you to have a name. I pay you to have a function. Now go." Amelia retreated, her cheeks burning with humiliation. She took refuge behind the service station, ostensibly polishing silverware that was already gleaming. From her position, she had a clear, unobstructed view of table 8. She watched as Julian Croft leaned across the table and placed his hand over Cassandra's. Cassandra didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. A wave of nausea rolled over Amelia. This wasn't a business meeting. This was something else entirely. She watched, frozen as they spoke in hushed, urgent tones. She couldn't hear every word, but snippets drifted towards her, sharp and chilling. "The launch of Nightingale is the key," Julian was saying. "The algorithm is his masterpiece. If we can discredit it on day 1. "The access codes are in his home office, safe," Cassandra replied, her voice a venomous whisper. "The combination is Eleanor's birthday. The sentimental fool." Amelia's blood ran cold. Eleanor, her mother's name, It had to be a coincidence, but the cold dread in her gut told her it wasn't. Then, Cassandra did something that made Amelia's world tilt on its axis. She opened her clutch and slid a small, leather-bound notebook across the table to Julian. These are his private server passwords. He jots them down in here. It's his one analog weakness. Julian smiled, a predator's smile. He took the notebook, but as he did, his elbow nudged a small folder that was sitting beside his plate. The folder slid off the table, landing silently on the plush carpet. Neither of them noticed. They continued their conversation, their heads bent close together. Then Julian leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a friendly peck on the cheek. It was a long, hungry, possessive kiss, right there in the middle of Aurelia. Amelia felt as if she'd been punched. This wasn't just an affair. This was corporate espionage. This was a betrayal so profound it was almost biblical. They weren't just planning to break Alistair Finch's heart. They were plotting to annihilate his life's work. After another 10 minutes, they stood to leave. Julian paid in cash, a thick wad of bills that screamed, "No paper trail." They walked out, Cassandra's laughter echoing lightly in the quiet dining room. Amelia waited until they were gone, her heart hammering against her ribs. She walked over to table 8. The folder was still there, half hidden under the table. Her hands shook as she picked it up. It was a simple manila folder with a single sheet of paper inside. It looked like a preliminary draft of a contract, a merger between Croft Dynamics and a shell corporation. But what caught her eye was a signature at the bottom, a practice signature scrawled in the margin. Alistair Finch. Amelia froze. She had seen Alistair's signature hundreds of times on credit card receipts. She had a strange, almost photographic memory for details, a remnant from her 2 years as an art history major before her mother's illness forced her to drop out. She could recall the exact way Van Gogh's brush strokes created texture, the subtle imperfections in a Renaissance fresco, and she knew with absolute, bone-deep certainty that the signature in the folder was a forgery. The loop of the A was too tight, the cross of the F too aggressive. It was a masterful imitation, but it was wrong. This was the proof. This was the smoking gun. They weren't just stealing his passwords. They were planning to forge his signature, to sign away his company, to ruin him utterly. She spent the rest of her shift in a fog of cold terror. What could she do? Who would believe her? A waitress against Cassandra Davenport and Julian Croft. They would crush her. She'd be fired, blacklisted. Her mother's care, her apartment, everything would be gone. But to stay silent, to watch them serve Alistair Finch his own destruction on a silver platter. She couldn't. She couldn't be that ghost anymore. By the time she clocked out, the rain had stopped, but the city air felt heavy and suffocating. She had made a decision. It was reckless. It was terrifying. It was career suicide. But it was the only choice her conscience would allow. 3 days later, on a bustling Saturday night, the dining room at Aurelia was a glittering spectacle. The air hummed with the energy of billion-dollar deals and celebratory whispers. Amelia moved through it all like a sleepwalker, her mind a war room of rehearsed speeches and worst-case scenarios. At 8:30 p.m., the hostess seated table 12, Alistair and Cassandra. Amelia's heart felt like a trapped bird beating against her ribs. Seeing them together, knowing what she knew, was a physical torment. Alistair seemed more distracted than usual, his brow furrowed as he stared at his phone. Cassandra, a vision in emerald green silk, was holding court, regaling him with tales from a charity luncheon. And of course, I pledged a significant donation on behalf of Finch Automata, she was saying. The optics for the Nightingale launch are crucial, darling. We must appear benevolent." The meal was an exercise in tension. Alistair was quiet, his responses monosyllabic. Cassandra, perhaps sensing his distance, became more demanding, her criticisms of the service sharper and more frequent. "This quail is overcooked," she snapped, pushing her plate away after a single bite. "The skin is flaccid. Is your chef having an off night, or is this the level of incompetence I should now expect? My sincere apologies, Miss Davenport. I will have it remade for you at once." "Don't bother," she said, with an imperious wave. "The moment is ruined. Just bring me the check, and inform your manager that I am deeply disappointed." Amelia collected the plate, her cheeks on fire. As she turned away, she heard Alistair's low voice. "Cass, for God's sake, it was a piece of poultry. There's no need to be cruel." "I'm not being cruel, Alistair." Cassandra's voice was like ice. "I am demanding excellence. It's a principle you, of all people, should understand. You don't build an empire by accepting mediocrity. You cut it out before it infects the rest of the system." The hypocrisy was so staggering, it almost made Amelia laugh. She returned with the check. Cassandra had excused herself to the powder room, leaving Alistair alone, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked utterly exhausted, a king isolated in his own castle. This was it. Her moment. Her hands were slick with sweat as she placed the leather bill folder on the table. "Mr. Finch," she began, her voice barely a whisper. He looked up, his grey eyes clouded with weariness. "Yes. What is it, Anna?" "It's Amelia, sir." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "Mr. Finch, I know this is completely inappropriate. I know you have no reason to listen to me, but I have to say something. I have to warn you." He frowned, his full attention finally locking onto her. The weariness was replaced by a flicker of irritation. "Warn me about what?" The words tumbled out, clumsy and desperate. "It's about Miss Davenport. Sir, she's not who you think she is. She's working with Julian Croft. I saw them here on Thursday. They're planning something against you, against Finch Automata. Something to do with the Nightingale launch. They kissed, sir, and I found this." Her hand trembled as she pulled a folded piece of paper from her apron pocket, a photocopy of the forged signature page. "This isn't your signature." "I know it's not." The air around the table grew cold and still. Alistair's expression didn't change, but it hardened, the lines around his eyes and mouth deepening into a mask of stone. The distracted tech genius vanished, and in his place was the ruthless CEO who had conquered Silicon Valley. "What did you just say to me?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm telling you the truth, sir. They're planning to ruin you. They mentioned your private passwords, a safe." "How dare you?" Alistair whispered, the words hitting her like a physical blow. "You stand there, in your uniform, and you dare to spin this pathetic tabloid fantasy." He stood up, his voice rising, shaking with a cold, controlled fury. "What is this? Some kind of corporate espionage? Did Croft pay you to plant this seed of doubt? Or is it a simple shakedown? How much do you want to make this story go away?" "No, Mr. Finch, I swear, I'm just trying to help." "You thought wrong," he hissed, his face a mask of contempt. "You are offensively, catastrophically out of line." At that exact moment, Cassandra returned, gliding back to the table with a serene smile. "Darling, what's all the commotion? You look furious." Her eyes darted from Alistair's enraged face to Amelia's terrified one. A flash of pure panic crossed her features before she concealed it behind a look of haughty amusement. "Oh, what has she done now? Accused you of having a secret family." Alistair didn't look at Cassandra. His glacial grey eyes were still locked on Amelia. "This employee was just telling me a rather creative story about you and Julian Croft plotting my downfall." Cassandra let out a perfectly pitched, theatrical gasp, followed by a tinkling, cruel laugh. "Oh, darling, how utterly desperate. The help gets so envious, don't they? They see a life they can only dream of and they try to burn it all down." She placed a proprietary hand on Alistair's arm. "Alistair, this is unacceptable. I will not be harassed by your staff. Have her fired. Now." Amelia's world crumbled. "Mr. Finch, please, just look at the signature. Compare it." Alistair looked from Cassandra's flawlessly feigned outrage to Amelia's desperate plea. He saw a choice: his perfect, pedigreed fiancée, the cornerstone of his new life, or a hysterical waitress peddling conspiracy theories. For a man haunted by a past business failure where he'd trusted the wrong partner, the decision was a brutal, self-protective reflex. He had built a firewall around his life, and Amelia was a virus. He raised a single commanding finger, summoning the restaurant manager, a severe Frenchman named Monsieur Dubois. "Mr. Finch, is everything to your satisfaction?" Dubois asked, his eyes already flicking nervously toward Amelia. "No," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. "This employee, Amelia, has made slanderous and malicious accusations against my fiancé. I want her terminated, immediately." "But sir," Amelia choked out, tears finally breaking free. "Mr. Finch, I am mortified," Dubois began, already pale. "If she is still employed here tomorrow morning," Alistair continued, his voice as final as a death sentence, "I will not only cancel my personal account and all corporate events for Finch Automata, but I will make it my personal mission to ensure every one of my associates knows that Aurelia harbors employees who attempt to extort its clientele. Am I understood?" Dubois' face turned ashen. He rounded on Amelia, his expression one of pure venom. "Vance, my office, now. You are finished." Amelia looked at Alistair Finch one last time. He was calmly folding his napkin and placing it on the table, his face utterly devoid of emotion, as if she had already been deleted from his reality. Cassandra stood beside him, a small, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Amelia turned and walked the long, humiliating path across the dining room. Every eye was on her. She had seen the truth. She had spoken it, and it had cost her everything. As she pushed through the swinging kitchen doors, the last sound she heard was Cassandra's light, victorious laughter, a sound that would haunt her for a long, long time. For the next 2 months, Amelia's life became a quiet study in desperation. Monsieur Dubois had made good on his threat, blacklisting her so effectively that every fine dining establishment in the city hung up on her the moment she said her name. She was surviving on temp jobs, washing dishes in greasy spoons, bussing tables at a noisy sports bar in Queens, each shift a brutal reminder of the world she had lost. The photocopy of the forged signature sat in a drawer in her tiny apartment, a useless monument to her folly. Meanwhile, Alistair Finch tried to bury the incident. He told himself Amelia was a corporate plant, a disturbed woman, a symptom of the envy his success generated. He threw himself into the final preparations for the Nightingale launch, a massive media event scheduled in just a few weeks. He and Cassandra were planning an extravagant engagement party at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a celebration that would double as a pre-launch confidence boost for his investors. But Amelia's words were a shard of glass lodged deep in his mind. "This isn't your signature." He found himself watching. He had always delegated the social and philanthropic aspects of his life to Cassandra, trusting her judgment implicitly. Now he started paying attention. He noticed how she would subtly steer conversations away from the technical details of Nightingale. He noticed how Julian Croft, once a bitter rival, was suddenly sending polite, almost friendly emails about industry synergy. Then came the red flag he couldn't rationalize away. His CFO presented him with the final budget for the engagement party. The line item for Cassandra's chosen charity, the Foundation for Tomorrow's Children, was a staggering $5 million. $5 million? Alistair questioned, frowning. I thought we agreed on a $1 million donation. Ms. Davenport authorized the increase, the CFO said, pulling up the signed directive. She said it was for a last-minute media sponsorship to maximize our philanthropic footprint before the launch. Alistair looked at the signature on the document. It was his. Or it was supposed to be. He pulled out his pen and signed his name on a blank sheet of paper next to it. He stared at the two signatures. They were nearly identical, but as he looked closer, he saw it. The loop of the A was just a fraction too tight. The cross of the F was infinitesimally more aggressive. It was the same discrepancy from the waitress's photocopy. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to creep up his spine. That night, he went into his home office. The safe, hidden behind a minimalist painting, held his most sensitive documents. The combination was, as the waitress had claimed, his mother's birthday. The sentimental fool. The words echoed in his head. Inside, he found the leather-bound notebook Cassandra had given him, the one where he jotted down his private server passwords. His one analog weakness. He felt like a man in a nightmare. He told himself it was a paranoid delusion, but he was a man who trusted data above all else. He sat down at his terminal and, with a few keystrokes, initiated a deep-level forensic audit of the Foundation for Tomorrow's Children. He was a billionaire with near-infinite processing power at his fingertips. The firewalls and shell corporations that would have taken a federal agency weeks to unravel, he dismantled in under an hour. The truth was uglier than he could have imagined. The Foundation was a ghost, a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, with a single director, Julian Croft. The $5 million donation had been immediately rerouted to an offshore account controlled by Croft Dynamics. He then accessed the encrypted servers for Finch Automata. He found what they were looking for, a hidden back door in the Nightingale source code. It was a kill switch, designed to create a catastrophic failure during the live demonstration at the launch event. The resulting stock crash would devalue his company by 90%, allowing Croft to initiate a hostile takeover for pennies on the dollar, using Alistair's own $5 million as part of the seed money. And the architect of the back door? The access logs were undeniable. The breach had come from Cassandra's personal laptop, using his passwords from the leather notebook. The phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the cold marble floor. The betrayal was absolute. It was his fiancée, his rival, his own money, his life's work, all twisted into a perfect weapon aimed at his heart. And the waitress, Amelia. She had seen it all. She had tried to warn him. She had handed him the truth, and he had thrown it back in her face and destroyed her life for it. You cut it out before it infects the rest of the system. Cassandra's words. He had treated an innocent woman like a cancer, while the real disease was sleeping in his bed. A terrifying calm settled over him. It was the same hyper-focused state he entered before a critical product launch. The fog of love, of trust, of the perfect life he was building, it all burned away, leaving only the cold, hard clarity of the code. He looked at the invitation to their engagement party sitting on his desk. The theme was Celestial Dreams. He picked it up and smiled, a grim, chilling smile. You want a party, Cassandra? he whispered to the empty room. "You'll get a party you'll never forget." For the next 72 hours, Alistair Finch moved with the silent, deadly precision of a shark. He made calls to his true head of security, a man Cassandra had never met, to federal investigators, and to the board of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And he made one last call to a private investigator. "I need you to find a waitress," he said, his voice like ice. "Her name is Amelia Vance, former employee of Aurelia. Find her, and find out what they did to her." The Temple of Dendur at the Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed. Bathed in ethereal blue and silver light, the ancient stones were surrounded by tables, draped in midnight silk and glittering with crystal. 200 of New York's most powerful figures mingled, sipping vintage champagne, their hushed conversations echoing in the cavernous space. This was the social event of the year, the engagement party of Alistair Finch and Cassandra Davenport. Cassandra was the star around which the entire galaxy of guests revolved. She wore a custom gown of silver Dior silk that shimmered like starlight, and at her throat lay the celestial diamond, a pre-wedding gift from Alistair, a flawless 50-carat stone that refracted the light with blinding brilliance. Julian Croft was there, playing the role of a supportive industry colleague, a wolf in a Tom Ford tuxedo. Alistair was the perfect host, moving through the crowd with a warm smile and a firm handshake, his grey eyes betraying nothing of the storm raging within him. "They are a true power couple," a banking CEO murmured to his wife. "She's exactly what he needed," his wife agreed. She gave him class. After the first course, Alistair stepped onto the stage, tapping a glass for attention. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," he began, his voice smooth and resonant. He smiled directly at Cassandra, who looked back at him with an expression of pure adoration. "Tonight is about celebrating a union, a partnership built on the most sacred of foundations, trust." He raised his glass. "To my fiancée, Cassandra." "To Cassandra," the room echoed. "Cassandra has taught me the importance of looking beyond the data, of seeing the bigger picture," Alistair continued, his smile unwavering. "She's taught me about philanthropy, about legacy, and about the devastating consequences of a single, critical flaw in a system." He turned his gaze toward Julian Croft. "And I must also thank my esteemed colleague, Julian. He's shown me that in our industry, sometimes the greatest opportunities come when you are willing to take a risk on an unconventional mirror." The presentation rolled. But it was not a presentation. It was a vivisection. On the massive screen behind Alistair, there were no smiling children, no heartwarming testimonials. There was only the cold, brutal architecture of a lie. It began with the incorporation documents for the Foundation for Tomorrow's Children, filed in the Cayman Islands, the digital paper trail as clean and sterile as a morgue. Then Julian Croft's face appeared, not the suave Forbes cover photo, but the flat, unflattering image from his passport application, his eyes like chips of glass. He was listed as the sole director. A low murmur, the sound of 200 sharks smelling blood in the water, rippled through the Temple of Dendur. Cassandra's hand, which had been resting on Alistair's arm, tightened into a claw. Her smile was no longer a feature of her face. It was a rictus, a mask of painted porcelain beginning to crack. "The Foundation's primary purpose," Alistair continued, his voice devoid of all emotion, a simple narrator of facts, was to facilitate a single, significant transaction. The screen shifted to display a bank transfer authorization for $5 million. His own signature, the forged one, was magnified to fill the screen, a red circle highlighting the unnaturally tight loop of the A. This transfer, from Finch Automata's charitable fund, was authorized without my knowledge. It was then, as this transaction log from the SWIFT network confirms, immediately rerouted, not to fund schools or hospitals, but to a numbered account controlled by Croft Dynamics. The room was now so quiet that the sound of a single fork scraping against a plate was an obscenity. Julian Croft had gone pale, a sheen of sweat visible on his brow, even in the cool, conditioned air. "Nate, darling, what is this?" Cassandra's whisper was a thread of sound, thin and brittle. "This is some kind of mistake. A hack. It must be." "It is a hack," Alistair agreed, turning to look at her for the first time. The warmth was gone from his eyes. In its place was a vast, grey emptiness, the landscape of a dead star. A very sophisticated one. It was designed to coincide with a secondary hack. The screen changed again. This time it displayed a cascade of green and black code, the elegant syntax of his Nightingale algorithm. But within it, highlighted in a virulent red, was a block of code that didn't belong. It was a ghost in his machine. "This," Alistair said, his voice dropping, "is a kill switch, a back door designed to trigger a catastrophic, cascading failure during the live launch demonstration. The resulting stock collapse would have devalued my company by 90%, allowing for a hostile takeover at pennies on the dollar, using, among other funds, my own $5 million. He paused, letting the sheer, beautiful malevolence of the plan settle over the audience. He then pointed a remote, and a new window popped onto the screen. An access log. "The back door was uploaded from this IP address," he stated. "An address registered to the guest Wi-Fi network of this very apartment." He gestured to the penthouse they shared, from a laptop with this MAC address. A string of alphanumeric code appeared, which belongs to a custom-configured MacBook Pro, purchased for you, Cassandra, as a birthday gift last April, using, of course, the passwords from this. An image of the leather-bound notebook appeared. Then, a video file began to play. It was security footage from Aurelia, grainy but undeniable. Cassandra and Julian, the holding of hands, the conspiratorial lean, the kiss, long, hungry and damning. A sound escaped Cassandra's throat, a strangled sob of pure animal terror. "No, it's fabricated. A deep fake. Alistair, he's framing us. Julian threatened me. He made me. He made you wear this?" Alistair's voice was soft, almost gentle, which was somehow more terrifying. He reached out and lightly touched the celestial diamond at her throat. A flawless 50-carat stone, a beautiful pre-wedding gift. The setting is custom, platinum, and palladium. It also contains a state-of-the-art, high-fidelity microphone and a geolocation chip accurate to within 2 meters. I have spent the last 72 hours listening to you and Julian orchestrate every detail of my destruction. Would the room care for an audio sample? He didn't need to play it. The look on Cassandra's face was a confession more absolute than any recording. The porcelain had shattered, revealing the hollow, desperate thing beneath. Her father, a man whose face was a monument to generational wealth and power, slowly stood up, turned his back on his daughter, and walked out of the room without a word. It was a more profound execution than any Alistair could have devised. "The engagement is terminated," Alistair announced, his voice now flat, administrative. "The prenuptial agreement you signed, Cassandra, contains a rather robust clause regarding criminal activity and infidelity. It stipulates a complete forfeiture of all assets and claims. You will leave my home tonight with nothing but the clothes you are wearing. Security will escort you." Two men in unobtrusive dark suits materialized at her side. They did not touch her, but their presence was an iron wall. Alistair then turned his dead-star gaze on Julian Croft, who was frozen halfway out of his chair. "And you, Julian, the gentlemen standing by the exits are not museum security. They are federal agents from the Southern District of New York. They have a warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and corporate espionage. Your assets, both corporate and personal, were frozen by court order 17 minutes ago. There is no flight to Monaco. There is only a black car waiting to take you downtown." As the agents moved in, silent and efficient, Alistair looked out at the sea of stunned, rapt faces. He felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just the cold, clean emptiness of a system that has been successfully purged of a virus. "I was a fool," he said, his voice suddenly raw, human, cracking the robotic composure. "I built an empire on the premise of predicting human behavior, yet I was so blinded by the life I thought I wanted. I failed to see the truth when it was presented to me. The truth was told to me by a woman named Amelia Vance. She saw the forgery. She tried to warn me. She had everything to lose and she lost it. I punished her for her integrity. I had her fired, blacklisted and ruined because I was an arrogant coward who preferred a beautiful lie. For that, there is no excuse." He placed the microphone carefully back on its stand. "My sincerest apologies for the disruption to your evening. The sea base, I'm told, is excellent." He stepped off the stage, not looking at the social and financial carnage he had wrought. He walked through the silent parting crowd, out of the ancient temple, past the waiting federal cars, and into the cool, indifferent air of the New York night. He had not won. He had simply survived a flaw in his own design. And now he had to begin the work of debugging his own soul. For Amelia, the first sign that the world had tilted back on its axis came not as a thunderclap, but as a quiet electronic chime. It was a wire transfer notification from her bank. The amount was so large, so absurd, that she initially assumed it was a phishing scam. It was followed, an hour later, by a thick envelope delivered by a white-gloved courier who required her signature on a digital tablet. Inside, there was no letter, only a cashier's check for $500,000 and a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored cardstock. On it, typed in a simple serif font, were the words, "A preliminary settlement for wrongful termination, defamation, and punitive damages. This is insufficient. It is a beginning." There was no signature. She knew, instinctively, whose it was not. The money was a strange, terrifying thing. It sat in her bank account like a sleeping dragon. It wasn't a gift. It was restitution. It was the price of her humiliation, the monetary value of her terror. For 2 days, she didn't touch it. She and her mother, Eleanor, just looked at the number on the screen. "It's conscience money," Eleanor said, her voice soft. She had aged a decade in the past few months, the stress of Amelia's situation carving new lines around her gentle eyes. From a man who has just realized his conscience has a cost. "What do I do with it, Mum?" Amelia whispered, tracing the numbers on the laptop screen. "First," Eleanor said, placing her warm, dry hand over her daughter's, "you pay the dragons." The next day, Amelia paid off the entirety of her mother's medical debt. She watched the monstrous, 6-figure balance on the hospital portal shrink to 0. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an exorcism. She then paid off her student loans, her credit cards, and broke their lease on the cramped, drafty apartment that always smelled of their neighbors' cooking. The money bought them safety. A sun-filled apartment in a quiet doorman building with a view of something other than a brick wall. It bought them the best doctors for Eleanor, specialists who spoke in tones of calm reassurance instead of hurried urgency. Most of all, it bought Amelia the one luxury she had never known, the absence of fear. But it did not buy her peace. She enrolled back in college, finishing her art history degree. She dove into the hushed, orderly world of museums and archives with a near-religious fervor. Here, things made sense. Here, truth had a physical weight. She learned about provenance, the documented history of an object, a chain of ownership that proved its authenticity. She spent hours in conservation labs, watching as technicians used X-rays and infrared light to see beneath the surface of a painting to find the pentimenti, the artist's earlier, abandoned ideas hidden beneath the final layer. She became obsessed with the idea of seeing what was underneath. She understood now that some forgeries were not on canvas. Some were made of flesh and bone and wore Dior. She followed the Finch Davenport scandal in the news, of course. It was impossible to avoid. The stories painted Alistair as a tragic, brilliant figure, a man betrayed who had enacted a swift and brutal justice. Cassandra and Julian were villains from a modern-day opera, their downfall spectacular and complete. Cassandra had vanished, reportedly living in obscurity somewhere in Europe, her family name forever tarnished. Julian Croft was facing a decade in federal prison. Amelia never heard from Alistair. She didn't expect to. The money had been his apology, his final word. He had closed the account. She was a loose end that had been neatly and expensively tied up. She told herself she was fine with that. She told herself she wanted nothing from the man who had looked at her with such contempt, who had dismissed her truth and shattered her life with a single, lazy command. She told herself this over and over, until she almost believed it. Alistair Finch lived in a fortress of his own making. In the year following the gala, he had systematically dismantled and rebuilt his life. He fired nearly 40% of his executive staff, not because they were complicit, but because they had, like him, failed to see the rot in the system. He became a recluse, his public appearances ceasing entirely. He ran his global empire from the silent, minimalist expanse of his penthouse, a place now scrubbed clean of every trace of Cassandra Davenport. He had won the war, but the victory felt like ashes in his mouth. He had exposed the betrayal, but the knowledge of his own blindness was a cancer. He would sit for hours, staring at the lines of code that made up Nightingale, the project he had saved. It was perfect, logical, and clean. And yet, he had nearly lost it, because he couldn't read the flawed, messy, human code of the woman he was going to marry. The waitress, Amelia Vance, haunted him. Not her face, which he could barely recall, but her words. "This isn't your signature." "I know it's not." How had she known? He, a man who could find a misplaced semicolon in a million lines of code, had stared at that same signature and seen nothing. She, a woman polishing silverware in the background of his life, had seen everything. It was a failure of perception so profound it shook the foundations of his identity. He hired the best private investigator in the country, not to watch Amelia, but to compile a complete, exhaustive dossier on what his actions had done to her. He read the report in a single, sickening sitting. The blacklisting, the humiliating temp jobs, the mounting debts. The investigator had included a note at the end. Subject is remarkably resilient. Primary concern appears to be the health of her mother, Eleanor Vance. Subject is currently re-enrolled at Columbia University, specializing in art history, specifically the study of Renaissance forgeries. The irony was so acute it was physically painful. While he was dealing with the fallout of his life, she was formally studying the very skill that could have saved him. He waited. He knew he had no right to intrude on the new, safe life he had funded. He had paid the debt, but the damage was not a financial transaction. It was a moral one. He waited a year. A year of rebuilding his company, of installing new systems of verification and trust, of trying to learn how to see what was right in front of him. Finally, when he could wait no longer, he did not call. He did not send a car. He wrote a letter. On paper. With a pen. He sent it not to her new, secure address, but to the art history department at Columbia University, addressed to her. It was a formal, almost cold request for a consultation. He offered to pay her a professional fee for 1 hour of her time to discuss a matter of provenance and authentication. He gave her a date, a time, and the address of a small private gallery in Chelsea, and he waited to see if she would come. Amelia held the letter in her hands, the thick paper feeling heavy and dangerous. Her first instinct was to burn it. Her second was to tear it into 1,000 pieces. She did neither. She read it again, her art historian's eye analyzing it like a document of questionable origin. The handwriting was precise, angular, the writing of an engineer. The language was formal, transactional. It was a business proposal. It was safe. And yet, it terrified her. She went. She told herself it was because she was curious. She told herself it was to prove to him, and to herself, that she was no longer the frightened, powerless girl he had dismissed. The truth was, she didn't know why she went. The gallery was small, quiet, and currently closed to the public. Alistair was the only one there, standing not in front of a painting, but in front of a large, blank, white wall. He was thinner than she remembered, and the lines of exhaustion around his eyes were deeper. He wore a simple grey t-shirt and dark jeans, the uniform of his past, before Cassandra had dressed him in the armour of bespoke suits. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of the easy command she remembered. "Your letter was intriguing," she replied, her own voice cool and steady. She was proud of that. They stood in silence for a moment, the white wall between them, a canvas for everything unsaid. "I have spent the last year trying to understand how I failed," he began, his eyes fixed on the wall. "Not the business failure or the relationship failure, the perception failure. I looked at a forgery and I saw the real thing. You looked at it and saw the lie. I need to understand how. Not as a curiosity, as a matter of survival." He finally turned to look at her, and his grey eyes were raw with a desperate, analytical sincerity. "I process the world through data. I see patterns. I build predictive models. That is my language. You see, differently. You saw the loop of the A, the cross of the F. What were you seeing? Was it a memory, an instinct, a feeling?" This was not what she had expected. She had braced herself for an apology, for sentiment, for an attempt at connection. This was a request for data. It was the only way he knew how to talk about the chasm between them. "It wasn't a feeling," she said slowly, finding her footing. "It was a dissonance. In art, you study an artist's hand, the way they apply pressure, the speed of the stroke, the rhythm. It's as unique as a fingerprint. A good forger can copy the form, but they can't copy the intent, the confidence. The signature you showed me, the one on the charity donation, it was trying too hard. The lines were aggressive, where yours are efficient. It was a performance of your signature, not the real thing." He listened with an intensity that was almost frightening, as if she were explaining the unified field theory. A performance, he repeated, tasting the word. The intent behind the data. He walked over to a small table where two objects sat under a cloth. He removed it. One was a small, exquisite Renaissance portrait on a wooden panel. The other was a tablet computer. "This is a portrait by Antonello da Messina," he said, gesturing to the painting. "And this," he pointed to the tablet, which showed a perfect digital replica, "is a forgery, created by an AI I've been developing. It analyzed every known work by the artist. It replicated the chemical composition of the paint, the aging of the wood, the precise pattern of craquelure. It is, by every metric I can devise, a perfect copy." He looked at her. "Which one is real?" Amelia stepped forward. She didn't need to look at the tablet. She looked at the painting. She saw the faint, almost invisible trace of a fingerprint near the edge, where the artist had steadied the panel. She saw the way the light caught the layers of oil glaze, a depth the screen couldn't replicate. She saw the soul in the subject's eyes, a flicker of life that was an echo of the artist's own. "That one," she said, pointing to the wooden panel. "The AI can copy the brush strokes, but it can't copy the ghost of the artist's touch." Alistair stared at the painting, then back at her, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than pain crossed his face. It was wonder. "The ghost," he whispered. "The data I can't quantify." That was the beginning, not of a romance, but of a strange and compelling partnership. They met once a week at the gallery. He would bring her his puzzles, AI-generated art, forged documents, sophisticated phishing emails, and she would show him the tells, the tiny dissonances, the ghosts he couldn't see. In return, she would ask him about his world. He showed her the architecture of Nightingale, explaining how he was now building in ethical safeguards, systems designed to detect not just technical flaws, but malicious intent. They were two people from different worlds, speaking different languages, trying to solve the same problem: how to tell what is real. One evening, 6 months after their first meeting at the gallery, he took her to the newly reopened Aurelia. The restaurant was under new management. Monsieur Dubois was long gone. The food was just as exquisite, but the atmosphere was warmer, less severe. Over coffee, he didn't reach for her hand. Instead, he slid a thin portfolio across the table. "This is a proposal," he said. She opened it. It was the charter for a new non-profit foundation. The Finch Vance Foundation. Its mission statement was to promote authenticity and combat deception in the digital and corporate world. It outlined research grants, educational programs, and a pro bono consultancy to help whistleblowers. "I can build the systems," Alistair said, his voice quiet but firm. "I can fund it, but I don't have the language. I don't have the sight. The foundation needs a director. Someone who knows the difference between a performance and the real thing. Someone who can teach others how to see the ghost in the machine." He looked at her, his expression open, vulnerable, and utterly serious. "This isn't charity, Amelia, and it isn't conscience money. It's a partnership. I'm asking you to help me build something real out of the wreckage." Tears welled in her eyes, not tears of joy or sorrow, but of a profound, overwhelming recognition. This was not a fairy tale ending. This was not the billionaire asking the waitress to marry him. This was a man who had seen the abyss, asking the woman who had guided him out of it to help him build a lighthouse. She thought of the journey, the terror, the humiliation, the quiet healing among paintings, the strange and fascinating dialogue they had built. It was a story of two broken people who had, against all odds, forged something authentic from a catastrophic lie. "Yes," she whispered, her hand finally covering his across the table. "Yes, Alistair. Let's build it."